It is World Poetry Day. Today, the 21st of March. And I'm here today with some of my favourite poems and ways to get into poetry if you're not yet a poetry being. If you are looking to enter your poetry era, then start with these tips. Tip number 1, poetry anthologies. Poetry anthologies are a great way to get poems from all different poets, from all sorts of perspectives, all in one place. Here in the UK, one of our big poetry awards collates the shortlist of all their prizes into a yearly book called the Forward Book of Poetry. These come out yearly, and they also do a select collection every decade, like this one here, and I found a bunch of poets in these that I really enjoy. So the first poem I'm going to read today comes from this collection here, Poems of the Decade. This is the 2011 to 2020 collection. This poem is called Rookie, and it's by Caroline Bird. You thought you could ride a bicycle, but turns out those weren't bikes. They were extremely bony horses. And that wasn't a meal you cooked, that was a microwaved hockey puck. And that wasn't a book, that was a taco stuffed with daisies. What if you thought you could tie your laces, but all this time you were wrapping a whole roll of sellotape around your shoe and hoping for the best? And that piece of paper you thought was your tax return? A crayon drawing of a cat. And your best friend is actually a scarecrow you stole from a field and carted away in a wheelbarrow. Your mobile phone is a strip of bark with numbers scratched into it. Thousands of people have had to replace their doors at much expense after you battered theirs to bits with a hammer, believing that was the correct way to enter a room. You've been pouring pints over your head, playing card games with a pack of stones. Everyone's been so confused by you, opening a bottle of wine with a cutlass, lying on the floor of buses, talking to babies in a terrifyingly loud voice, all the while nodding to yourself like, yeah, this is how it's done, planting daffodils in a bucket of milk. Tip number 2, Instagram is not your enemy. There's been a lot of gatekeeping in terms of what is considered to be real poetry, and a community of people are very strongly against what they coin as Instagram poetry. Really, I think that Instagram is a fantastic tool for sharing poetry, whether that's your own poetry or the poetry of others that you are collating. I don't follow too many poets on Instagram, but one I do is Morgan Harper Nichols. Morgan is an autistic woman of colour who combines the medium of poetry with artwork in a really unique way. Morgan has 3 collections out in print, and they're all beautiful, and I really enjoy the words of affirmation and the progress over perfection outlook that they provide. It's something I don't always remember. I'm a very all or nothing brained woman. Another poetry Instagram that I follow is Poetry is Not a Luxury. This account collates hundreds of poems, from classics and Shakespeare to modern day poets. This next poem I'm going to read is from their Instagram page. This is Why Did It by William J. Harris. Why did it take all day to get nothing accomplished? Why? I could have started at noon and saved a lot of time. Tip number 3, use your library. Whether it's in person or using online services, your library is more than likely to have a collection of poetry that you could not collect if you tried. Through my library's collection on Libby, I was able to find poets such as Rachel Long, Kai Miller, Matthew Welton, Sophie Hannah, Rupi Kaur, and Trista Mateer. Also, if you have any subscription services such as Scribd, there's a wealth of poetry on there as well, such as the collection that this next poem is from, Lucky Wreck by Ada Limon, and this poem is called The Unbearable. My grandmother only wants to tell me who died and how. She tells me of all the traffic accidents as if she was reading a menu to me out loud. The man who was decapitated while driving a tractor, trying to make space for a new Stop and Shop. The woman whose eyelashes started growing inward until it was so painful all she could do was lie there and scream, and then finally not scream anymore. Over the kitchen table, I told her to stop it. She didn't understand why it was making me upset. It's what happens. And as she was trying to explain, in my mind, I had already left the room and walked up the street to the house I grew up in, and laid down outside on the green cement. In the shade, the cement was cool and hard. My old cat Smoke came up and sat on my chest, the way she never would when she was alive. And in the trees, there was a woodpecker and squirrel bustling on their branches, seeming very alien and small. I have a friend who says that sometimes when she thinks about animals, she starts to cry, and right now even my dog is dying. Yesterday when someone was petting him, He collapsed, as if the weight of the hand was too much, as if being touched, even in love, was unbearable. Tip number 4. Novels in verse. There isn't too many of these, but they might be a good foothold into the poetry world. I also haven't read too many, but the one I have read is one of my favourite books of all time. So there's that. The book in question is House Arrest by K.A. Holt, and this is a reading from it. When Levi was born, my dad was still here, 9 months ago. Feels like 9 years. Dad's heart was beating in the same room as mine. His lungs filled with the same air as mine. His stomach filled with the same pizza as mine. We had pepperoni that night, when Levi was born. We high-fived our root beers. Dad told the waitress, "I have 2 boys now. How about that?" And she gave us ice cream for free. And it was the best night, until it wasn't anymore. Then the phone rang in the pitch dark night, and Jose's mum answered because I was at their house. Dad was at the hospital with Mum and Levi. Jose's mum came to wake me up, but I was already awake. And she drove me to the hospital, and she told me Levi was sick, and the doctors didn't know what it was. And it was bad. Real bad. And they wanted me there, in case he died, so I could say goodbye. And none of it made sense, because Levi was a brand new baby, and nothing happens to brand new babies, because they are new and haven't hurt anyone yet. And Dad still had pizza in his stomach, and so did I, from earlier that night, when everything was okay. P.S. Levi did not die, not any time they told us he would, and there were a lot of times. Finally, number 5, seek advice. I think this one's pretty obvious, but go to people who love poetry and maybe share the same taste in novels as you if you are a novel reader, and see what kind of poetry makes them tick. Through watching Uncali and Alison Pages, I found Wendy Cope, and this poem is called A Vow. I cannot promise to never be angry. I cannot promise always to be kind. You know what you are taking on, my darling. It's only at the start that love is blind. And yet I'm still the one you want to be with. And you're the one for me, of that I'm sure. You are my closest friend, my favourite person, the lover and the home I've waited for. I cannot promise that I will deserve you. From this day on, I hope to pass that test. I love you and I want to make you happy. I promise I will do my very best. And that was it for our little exploration into poetry today. I hope you feel inspired to go and look for some new poetry. Even if it ends up being the case that poetry isn't for you, I hope that I have given you a chance to explore it. Thank you all for being here in this moment, and maybe I'll see you guys soon.